What's up, guys? I'm Kyle, and unfortunately, today we're talking about Trump. Now, this being a car channel, I'm going to try my best to sort of keep the political part of this out and just focus on how it affects the car industry. So, let's take a look. So, on Thursday, Trump had a meeting with European Union leaders, and he commented, "The Germans are bad, very bad. See the millions of cars they're selling to the US? Terrible. We will stop this." So what he's referring to here is that Germany sells more cars to America than America sells to Germany. Now some people have fired back saying, hey, a lot of German manufacturers actually build cars in the US and actually export them from the US. But if you look at the numbers, the US actually buys more German cars than it exports. And in Trump's mind, that's a loss, and he wants to turn that around. Now this comes after comments Trump made in January where he threatened a 35% tariff on all car imports from Germany, and he also threatened other manufacturers like Ford for building cars in Mexico and bringing them back into the States. So let's look at what would happen if Trump actually did enforce a 35% tariff on auto imports. Now, I already mentioned there are cars built by German manufacturers in the US. Those cars are the Mercedes C-Class, Volkswagen Passat, Volkswagen Atlas, Mercedes GLE and GLS, as well as all of the BMW X cars, the X3, 4, 5, 6. So those cars would be unaffected by a tariff like this because they're built in the US and sold in the US. They're not technically imported. But you'll notice there are some fairly large volume sellers that are absent from that list. Things like the BMW 3 Series, Volkswagen Golf, and anything by Audi, they're all made outside of the US and brought in. So those would all be subject to a 35% tariff. That would put those manufacturers in a really tough position because they simply can't compete with a 35% disadvantage compared to their competition. Let's take a look at the German sports sedans for an example here. So we're going to compare Audi A4, BMW 3 Series, and the Mercedes C-Class. For comparison's sake, let's say they're all $40,000 to begin with. With this 35% tariff, that's going to hike the price up to $54,000. Now the Mercedes C-Class is built in the US, so that tariff would not apply to it, but the 3 Series and the A4 would both have it applied. So the C-Class would stay at 40,000, but the other two are going to be up at 54,000. You can't compete with a $14,000 price cap. It doesn't work. Nobody's going to buy those cars. It's going to force them out of the market unless they move production to the US. So we're left with either pull out of the market or move production. Both of these are kind of a lose-lose situation. If they pull out of the market, we get fewer cars, there's less competition, there's less selection. Bad news for us. If they move production, well, now they have to pay for a new factory to be built. They have to pay for all of that infrastructure. They have to hire all these new people. That's going to cost a lot of money. And even once they get it all set up, there's still going to be disadvantages because now they're producing in smaller volumes. Instead of one plant in Europe producing for the whole world, now you have to have two plants, one in Europe producing for the rest of the world, and one in America producing for America. So you have a smaller plant producing smaller volumes, your economies of scale go down, it becomes more expensive to build these cars. And one way to counteract that would be to reduce the number of models, reduce the number of trim levels available, which again is bad for the consumer because we get less choice. And the other thing is, with all these extra costs, they're not just going to pay for that themselves. That money has to come from somewhere, which means even though they won't be subject to the tariff, the price of those models is still going to go up to help pay for that plant and all the retooling and everything required to do that. Now, I focused on German cars for this example because that's where Trump's statements were aimed at. They were aimed at German auto manufacturers, but it would really apply to every car made outside of the US, even regardless of who built them. Even cars built by American manufacturers outside of the US would still have to pay this 35% tariff. As I mentioned earlier, Trump has already threatened Ford about building cars in Mexico and bringing them back to the US. And there's actually a surprising number of American cars that are built outside of America. I'm going to list a few of them for you here. They include the Chrysler 300, Chrysler Pacifica, Dodge Charger, Dodge Challenger, Ford Edge, Ford Flex, Lincoln MKX, Lincoln MKT, Buick Regal, Cadillac XTS, Chevy Impala, Chevy Equinox, and GMC Terrain. Now those are just the cars made in Canada. There are others made in Mexico and other places around the world that get brought in to the US market, built by American manufacturers. All of those cars would be subject to a tariff. So if Trump were to implement this tariff that he's been threatening, it would make all cars more expensive, regardless of who made them. It would reduce the number of models available and therefore reduce competition because there's just less out there. and it would hurt pretty much all of their biggest trading partners and themselves. So good job, Trump. Sounds like a great plan. So I think I'll leave it there for today. Thanks for watching. Remember to like and subscribe and check me out on Instagram. I'll see you next week.